Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Journalism 205, Multimedia Journalism. Dr. Shermak here. Hope you're having a wonderful day as we tune in and discuss interviewing today. All right. Interviewing, let's just put it very directly. Journalism does not exist without interviewing because in order to do journalism, you have to talk to people. If you are not talking to people, you are just doing a research essay, and that's no shot against research essay. I love a good research essay. I used to teach research essays. They're still very useful, but they're not journalism, and we're doing journalism here. So, interviewing is important because interviews allow us to shine the light on other people, right? We've talked a little bit about already in the class how journalism is not about shining the light on ourselves. In any of these assignments, you cannot put yourself in the assignment. You cannot use I, we, me, us, our, those sort of things. Leave yourself out of it. Interviewing allows us to shine the light on other people and tell other people's stories. So, what does that entail? That's what I want to talk about today. For some of you, maybe many of you, this could be your first foray into interviewing, and it can be one of the more intimidating processes in journalism because you have to talk to strangers. All that those slogans and sayings that you learned, don't talk to strangers, stranger danger, all that stuff you learned growing up, throw it out the window. It's time to talk to strangers, right? That's the best way to do journalism. It's the best way to learn about your world. So we're going to talk about that today. Let's get very basic though. All right. Why do we do interviews? Why do journalists do interviews? Well, for most stories, the interview is the primary source of information. It's your best source. It's the most dynamic source you have. And what I mean by that is you kind of don't know what you're going to get when you talk to someone, right? You could interview someone and they could give you not so great quotes. They could give you maybe unreliable information, right? But you can also talk to people and they can give you amazing quotes that you know right away you're going to use in your story, whether it's a written story or a video story, so on and so forth. But it's dynamic in the sense that you have some control over the way it goes. And I'll talk more about that as we move through the discussion here. But it changes. It's fluid. You can ask follow-up questions. You can say, where could I go get more information about that? Or one of the best questions you can ask is, who else might I talk to about this topic? Or who would be interested in speaking with me about this topic? That's the dynamic element of an interview. So, of course, you should go out and look on the web. You should go look in research journals. You should go look up other data. That's great to have, and it's great to have to build background, which we'll talk about today. But the dynamic element of interviews is really what differentiates journalism from a lot of other research-based work. All right. So, and it's about connecting with people, always, always, always. So, I just mentioned this, I'll say it again, but, opportunities for expanding your knowledge. So they're going to suggest maybe people who you could talk to, expanding your world. If they say something you don't understand, it's okay to stop an interview subject and say, wait a minute, I'm not quite clear what that means. Could you explain that? Or tell me a little bit more about that. That's one of my favorite interview questions. Tell me a little bit more about that. You also build your network, right? So if you are interested, let's say you're in this class and you're training to be in journalism, maybe you want to work here in this particular area or whatever area that you're in, meeting more people, interviewing people will help build your network. If you have another story out there where a person you've talked to might either be a source or could direct you to a source for that story, that's a great tool to have in your toolkit to reach out and very efficiently reach out and contact some sources. So don't forget this ever, ever, ever. And I feel like I talk about this every time I speak to you here. Journalism is about people. You absolutely have to talk to people. Okay. So how do we do that? How do we prepare for it? So on and so forth. I look at interviews in kind of two different types, and we're going to focus more on the most common one, which is what I call the one-on-one interview. But there's typically the one-on-one interview and the press conference. Let's talk a little bit about the press conference. You've seen press conferences on television. Maybe you even got a chance to see one in person. There's multiple reporters from multiple different sources there. These are a much more efficient way for the sources to share information. That's why they're usually done about big events, maybe like a major crime. You certainly see them a lot in entertainment and sports. They are done when people know there's going to be a lot of reporters who are very interested in the story. So they're efficient. They can be efficient for reporters, right? But you have to be very assertive. You have to be kind of aggressive to ask your question, but also play off some of the ways your colleagues are asking questions too. And even though you're from other sources, you often work in a team in a way to ask questions of the subject. So, for example, you see it at the White House a lot, where a source will ask a question, the press secretary might dodge the question, and this is not a partisan statement. This happens in every administration. The press secretary might dodge the question. They call on the next person, and that person says, "Hey, can you actually answer the question my colleague here just asked?" You see that all the time. So it's kind of a way to, I hate this term, but I'm using it, popcorn some of your questions, in a sense. So that again is a type, but in our area, geographically, and particularly in student journalism, we don't really get the chance to do too many press conferences. It can happen, but not very often. The most common is what I call the one-on-one, or it can be sometimes one-on-two, one-on-three, one-on-four interview. But really, it's a one-on-one interview where you're talking directly to an individual person. And this happens either, by setting it up in advance or maybe speaking to an eyewitness on the scene of a story. It tends to lend itself a little bit better to a deeper dive conversation. It's a more intimate setting sometimes if it works out that way. This is much better for very sensitive topics, personal stories, so on and so forth. And I think it's even more follow-up friendly, and we'll talk about that as we move through today. So certainly, press conferences are a thing, but they're less common in the mode that we're in right now. But if you ever have any questions about press conferences, as always, don't hesitate to reach out. This might be the most important slide on this deck. All right. And this is Shermak created, Shermak tested, Shermak lived. In my experience, both as a journalist myself and as a teacher of journalism, the hierarchy of interviewing. All right. So let's start at the bottom. Okay. I realize sometimes when you're dealing with sources, the only option you might have is emailing someone. All right. It doesn't mean that emailing someone can't be an effective way of interviewing. I had a situation last week where a former student who's now at Cal Poly reached out and asked to interview me for a journalism project, and I agreed to do it. And we just couldn't get a time scheduled. I was a crazy week, and so eventually I said, "Hey, it might be a thing where I might have to answer your questions at 1 a.m. Can you email me the questions?" And she, having been my former student, even said, "Sherback, that you hate that, you don't like that." And I said, "It's not that I hate it. It's just that it's a last resort, and I'm sorry, but I'm kind of in last resort mode, right?" So that's what I want you to look at email as. You can email people and set up interviews, of course. That's a fine tool, but I'm talking about conducting the actual interview through email. There's a couple reasons why it's problematic. Number one, usually what you're doing is sending questions to a source, and then they're typing their answers. That's actually a lot of work. And you're asking that source to sort of do your work for you, essentially, right? You also lose the dynamic element of the interview. You can't bounce questions off one another. You can't ask follow-up questions. Also, a lot of times when there are sensitive stories where people are kind of nervous to talk on the record, they love to email. Why? Because they want to maybe run their questions by a supervisor, or they want to screen the questions, or they want to write their answers out and then run them by someone in PR, right? We're not in the business of doing gotcha journalism, but At the same time, we want authentic answers. We don't want this polished, perfect marketing public relations answer. We want authentic answers. So on email, it's a little less likely to get authentic answers because there's time to polish. All right. So there's a lot of reasons why email is not the best. I realize it's necessary sometimes, but it's not the best. We can move up this hierarchy very quickly into a better place when we go live. All right, when we go live. And what I mean by that is that you are live in conversation with someone. And there's typically three ways to do this. The phone call, remember that? Remember the phone? You have one. Most of you have one. And if not, you can get one. Here at school, I have a phone line in multiple offices. If you need a private place to make a phone call, I can make that happen. Let me know. Uh, the phone call is probably, I would say, historically, maybe the most valuable interviewing tool in journalism history. That's a claim, not a statement of fact. But um, get on the phone, use the phone, get live. I would even encourage you, once you get a story assignment, don't even send an email, make a phone call. A phone call shows a source that you are serious. Anyone can send an email. I get hundreds of emails every day. I have 5 email addresses across all the things that I do, including my personal email. Emails are easy to miss, and they're easy, maybe most importantly, they're really easy to ignore or push to the side. All right. I never do that with students, but sometimes I do it with colleagues. Don't tell anyone. I eventually get back to them, but when you're on a deadline, eventually isn't soon enough, is it? It's harder to ignore a phone call. When someone calls me, especially in this age, I think to myself, whoa, they mean business, right? You want to show that to your sources. So sometimes your first inclination might be to send an email. That can work, but don't sit on it for 2, 3 days. If you wait 24 hours even and you haven't heard back, pick up the phone, make a call, give them another 24 hours. If you haven't heard back, and I know this is bold, but we got to be bold, go knock on the door. Yeah, it's not crazy. It's how it has been done, and it's tried and true. We have the Zoom call now, which I put ahead of the phone call slightly. It's a little harder to set up, but on a Zoom call, not only do you get a live conversation, but you also get some visual cues from the video. All right. So a Zoom call, I say Zoom generally. This can also mean FaceTime, so on and so forth. Um, the best, though. The absolute best way to talk to people is face to face in person. And here in a multimedia journalism class, you're probably going to have to use this more than you would if you were just doing writing, because we need to record audio, we need to get photos, we need to record video. So I would say this hierarchy goes even higher in a multimedia class because face to face is required. Face to face means you're sharing the same space. If you can try to go to their space, I know that, obviously safety is going to be a concern. And if you feel more comfortable meeting them at a neutral location, that's fine. But let me share you a story with you. I had a student who, back when I was teaching at Cal State Fullerton, they were doing a feature story about this artist who created art from junk, essentially. And it was this really eclectic, interesting art. And this student's name was Matt. And Matt interviewed him, came back with a first draft of the story. And after he did a peer review in class, he came up to me and he just said very bluntly, he said, Dr. Shermak, this story sucks. I don't know what's wrong with it. This isn't a good story. I don't like what it is. It doesn't feel wholesome or interesting or anything. And so we began to talk, and I asked him, I said, well, how did the interview go? And what did you do for the interview? And he said, I talked to him on the phone. And I stopped him right there. And I said, Matt, you need to get in this guy's space. You need to go to his workshop, his garage, his warehouse, wherever he does his thing, and be there with him, conduct the interview in that space. It allows you as a journalist to make observations, utilize the 5 senses, which you can include in the story because you're a neutral observer. You can include those and be there and talk to him. Help him point things to you, show him, get photos of those things. Go talk to this dude in person. So, sure enough, next week, Matt went back, redid the story after he went to video. I'm sorry, went to visit this gentleman's, it was a garage essentially behind his house. And he went in there and talked to him, and the story just absolutely came to life and turned into a brilliant story. So, your best practice, the best way to speak to people, I think, for any story at any time is to go talk to them in person. Full stop. I know that isn't always possible. If talking to them in person isn't possible, try a video call. At the very least, try a phone call. And of course, our last resort is the email interview. All right. If you have any questions on that as you're going through your interviews, you're wondering how to approach things, there's a lot of different scenarios that present themselves when setting up an interview. I'm happy to advise you on that. Please reach out. There's three stages to an interview. And what's interesting, I think, is that the first stage that doesn't even involve talking to anyone is probably the most important. All right. So let's walk through these together, and I'm going to share some of my own experiences with you, as well as some guidance that I've learned, again, as a journalist myself and also as a teacher. So these three stages are prepare, engage, and follow up. These are all active verbs. You need to be active in order to be a good interviewer. Okay. You need to hustle. You need to work hard. You need to be willing to accept a no as another opportunity to do something different. You need to pivot. Okay. Let's talk about the preparation stage. This is a very wordy slide, forgive me, but as always, you can download the slides on Canvas if you want to look back over these. A lot of times when you interview people, it might be in relation to an event, right? If you're doing a feature story of some type, usually you call and kind of set up a time. But it's interesting, over the years, most of my interviews when I was a journalist happened before or after events that I was covering, meetings, sporting events, so on and so forth. If you're in this situation and there's some sort of event tied to the interview, in most cases there will be, number one, make sure you reach out ahead of time. Don't surprise attack them at the event. They're going to be busy, they're going to be distracted. Give them a little bit of an advance notice, a phone call, an email, a social media connection, and say, hey, I'm so and so. I'm writing a story for such and such. I want to come talk to you about X, Y, and Z. I'll be at the meeting, I'll be at the game on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Even if they don't reply to you, there's a good chance they see the message. I've had it happen all the time. Anytime you're scheduling an interview, whether it's going to be related to an event or something that's an offshoot separate interview, tell them what you're doing when you do the initial outreach and make them feel special. Tell them, hey, you're like the most important source that I need to talk to. I'm really looking forward to learning your wisdom on topic X, right? That's really important. When you schedule a time, schedule an exact time. Throw this Central Coast time stuff out the window. Some people are like, oh, I'll be there about 4. No, 4:15. Tell them that. I'll call you at 4:15. I've had students tell me that someone will call them after 3 p.m. Guess what time they called them? 7:30. That's a long time after 3 p.m. Get an exact time. Your time matters, their time matters. Agree upon something that is accurate and specific. All right. Um, as I talked about with the email, don't make your work their work. All right. Avoid asking questions like, can you give me a quote? That's not a question. That's a request. All right. That's different. You want to have a conversation with folks. So don't give them orders, right? Answer these questions. Give me a quote. Ask them questions to elicit those quotes. It's very different. And one other thing I advise everyone, and this is fine. This is totally professional. Give them your deadline. If you call them on a Tuesday, say, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you on Wednesday. My deadline is Friday." That way, they have a time parameter that they're working with too. And people tend to understand deadlines, and so they know. And if they don't get back to you, they might not be included in the story, right? Leaving things kind of willy-nilly, lackadaisical, wide open, it ends up creating lackadaisical, not so great product. All right. Be bold, be firm, and be solid in your attempt and what you're doing. Today, more than ever, you have the opportunity to research your subjects prior to the interview. Social media is a great way to do that. Research your subjects, interact with them on social media, follow them, send them a message. If you want to reach out to them via social and say, hey, I'd love to interview you, that's a great way to go. The Journalism 206 class, if you're interested, we talk about using social media as a source. And we've talked about it a little bit in this class too. That's a great way to do that. For your equipment, I'm primarily focused, as we do in this class, on mobile phones. You can have other equipment as well, but just some lessons that I've learned over the years. If you're going to use a voice recording app, download it first and play with it a little bit, get used to it. My preferred app is called Otter. It's otter.ai. It has a certain number of free minutes that you can use. And what Otter does that is so important is that it records and transcribes as you go. Working from a transcript is much easier than working from a live recording and having to rewind and go back and rewind and figure out what they said. When it's transcribed, it's much easier. This is a wonderful use of AI, a fully Shermak approved, totally ethical use of AI transcription. So check out Otter. There's some other ones out there. There's a service called Rev. If you're recording someone over a phone call, tape a call is a good source. You can also put your phone next to your laptop and record on Otter on the laptop. I like to use an app called Voice Report Record Pro, which is useful. And then everyone on their phone has a good old-fashioned voice memo app, and that can work really well. Make sure you are batteried up. Make sure you have your fully charged device. If you have a spare backup battery, that's a wonderful tool. Test all your cords. Make sure you have cords with you. I remember going to a basketball game once and I took a laptop with me. This was a long time ago, so it was an old clunky one. And I was set up in the bleachers and I didn't have an extension cord long enough to reach the outlet that I had access to. And I ended up having to move to a place where I couldn't see well, couldn't work that well, but I needed juice. So always think about those things, especially with live events. And then don't forget, I know this is going to sound old man yells at cloud, but have an analog backup to your digital. And what I mean by that is paper and pen. If all else fails, paper and pen will work. I love these little um, notepads, these reporters notebooks. I have a ton of them. You can get them anywhere you can find paper, aka Amazon. They're great because they fit in the hand. I don't know how well you can see that on the video, but they fit in your hand and they're very nice to hold while you're writing. And you can also hold your phone that's recording as you are writing, which is another nice feature of the reporter's notebook. So those are some good tools you can get for that. A lot of people think, oh, I gotta, I gotta write out all my questions ahead of time. And I think that's really good advice. Do you have to do it? Not necessarily, but I think it's a best practice. And I'm always here to teach you best practices. I'm not going to teach you meh practices or practices, best practices. Best practices, I say if you're going to do a story, maybe a deeper, like a feature story or a profile, I would take at least 10 questions with you before you go. You might not get to those questions, and you'd be surprised how often that happens. It's okay if you don't get to them, but it's good to be prepared and have a checklist. One of the ways that you can address, or I'm sorry, generate these questions is using something in journalism that we call the Gauss formula. That's an acronym for goals, obstacles, solutions, and start. All right. So for a goal question, I think these are wild. It's wild how can be applied to almost any story. What are you trying to accomplish? That's the goal, right? What are you trying to accomplish? What problems are you facing or have you faced or do you face? That's obstacles. We're always having obstacles. That's sort of that conflict news value here. Solutions. How are you handling these problems? How are you overcoming those obstacles? Again, conflict being a news value that kind of plays in here. And then one of the things I think that's really, really important is thinking about how they got their start. Where did this begin and where is it going? Think about your story structure as you're asking questions, but this Gauss formula can help you generate questions Any information you can get your hands on related to this person or event, agendas, media advisories, press releases, previous coverage of them. Read it, absorb it, take a look at it, make notes. Get really, really well prepared. What you want to do is prove to your um, subject that you are interested and you want to be an expert on them. All right. And when they see that, they're going to know, hey, this person is serious. And most importantly, I trust them with my story. Okay. Coffee sip break. I could edit it out, but I drink coffee. It's authentic. Engagement. This is, excuse me, this is a fancy word for interviewing, right? This is when we actually talk to the person. Okay. So the gold standard when you interview anyone is to record it. All right. I really want to take a moment on this because this makes folks uneasy a little bit because people, unfortunately, think that journalists, when they record, are up to some nefarious thing. I'm going to put this recording on the internet and call the president, and I don't know. So here's what you need to say. Here's what I say when I do an interview. I basically tell them, first off, I ask them. And legally, you need to do that. We don't do secret interviews. I know people think that undercover journalism, that's not a thing. All right. And if it is a thing, it's not a very good thing. And it's certainly not a very ethical thing. We want to talk to people. And in order to record them, we actually need to ask them. It's a California state law. Maybe you're watching this from another state. Check out your own state, but I'm guessing most of you watching are in California. It's a California state law to ask permission to record. Same thing as if you're in a class and you were going to record a lecture. And I have it in my syllabus, my syllabi actually, in all of them. If you want to record, I'm fine with that. Just ask permission because that's the law. And it's more ethical. Again, best practices. So do this, but when you do this, frame it in a way that shows that it is about their best interests. Here's an example. Hey, I'm Jeremy Shermak. I'm a reporter for the Questonian student newspaper. I'm doing a story about new construction on campus. Can I talk to you? And they say, yes. Can I record this interview to ensure that I get the most accurate quotes and reporting? Yes. Few people are going to say, no, don't record it. I don't want you to be accurate, right? No one's going to say that. If you frame it and ask the question in a way that shows why you're recording it, and you're not lying because you are recording it to get the most accurate quotes, it's going to make that discussion much easier. All right. It's all about framing it. And it's all about you showing that you are a thoughtful, reputable, ethical reporter. Okay. So do it that way, and you're going to have really good results. I would also, even though you're recording, have a little handy dandy notebook because you're going to hear things along the way that are like what I call an aha moment or an aha quote. Whoa, that's a really good quote. Look down at the timestamp on your recorder, jot it down at, 8:31, construction quote. That might be something later you're like, I need to go find that quote right away because I know that was a good one. It helps you be more efficient. Not every interview is an interrogation, it's a conversation, right? Even if you are asking aggressive questions, if you're talking about a controversial topic, be a human, all right? Have a conversation about it. You can be assertive and respectful, you can be assertive and human. I think the best way to start any interview is with one very simple question that is more human than it is journalistic. How are you doing? You're going to talk to people who might be going through some really serious things. Maybe just witnessed an accident. They've lost a loved one. They lost their home in a flood. Asking that question shows that you are first a human before you are a journalist. And I think that's the secret. That's the key. That's the focus we need as journalists, to be human first. So I love starting with that. How are you doing? When I was working at Columbia College in Chicago, uh, our campus was experiencing part-time teacher strike, and the majority of the teachers on that campus were part-timers, known as adjuncts. And classes were getting canceled. Students who were planning to graduate that semester were finding themselves in complete limbo because they weren't having classes they needed to be able to graduate. It was really hard. And it felt like no one was a winner, right? There was certainly an understanding why they went on strike, but everyone lost something. And our students covered it masterfully. I mean, they won awards for it. I was so proud of them. And one of the things that we talked about in that newsroom every single day was asking people, how are you doing? Because what we found was that A, demonstrated the kind of care that I just talked about, but B, most people never got to that second question. People started really talking about how they felt. And when you interview people, the most valuable information you can get from someone is not the date and time of the next play or the percentage of people who, purchase textbooks from the bookstore. It is how they're feeling and what they think about things. You can't put your opinion into a story. You are the objective journalists, objective in air quotes, but they can. And you can seek those opinions and seek those feelings. You add spice and flavor to your story when you bring in quotes from people when you interview them. That's what adds to it. It's so important. All right. So, the how are you doing is a really, really critical question. Don't forget it. It does a lot of work for you. Another great piece of advice is listen more than you speak. This seems obvious. Um, you all know by now that I'm a talker. But if you're talking more during the interview than your subject, something's probably not going well. So, how do you change that? Well, push your subject a little bit more. If they say something, it's okay for you to politely ask a question like, how? Or why is that? Or my personal favorite, tell me more about that. What is that? What does that mean? What does that mean to you? How does that make you feel? You have to listen really well and start engaging. That's why I call this engagement with the subject on what they're saying, even if they're not saying much. And at the end of the day, no matter what, don't forget about our basic pillars of journalism: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Let those things drive the question, right? Let those things drive the interview. That's going to lead you to success. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Some other types of questions you could ask, questions that elicit emotion, right? Tell me about the time when. Tell me the story of. These are encouraging a little bit longer form responses. Describe the conversation. Maybe they're talking about an interaction with someone. Tell them to describe it. How are they feeling? What was it like? Even give you visuals. Where were you? Those sort of things. When people are talking about a process or going through a process of any kind, what were the steps that got you from A to B, that got you from being a new college graduate to a barbershop owner, right? And one of my favorites is, how did that make you feel? They might mention something happened. You can follow up with, how did that make you feel? And then others sort of eliciting thoughts. I like this one. If you had to describe a debate in your head, what was one side saying? What was the other side saying? So if they're in like a controversial issue, maybe they're struggling with the topic. Ask them to kind of give them the sides that they're kicking around in their head. If someone's overgone a major change, what would the old you say about the new you, or vice versa? Um, when did you first discover something? What was this going to be? What was this going to be like before you started? How did you picture it? Um, Things that bring about stories and lessons. Those are really great questions to ask during the interview process. Follow up begins during the interview. All right. What you need to do during the interview, as you wrap up, I think there are two really important things to address. Number one is make sure to ask them if there's anything else they'd like to say. You've gone through a lot of questions, you've done a lot of prep, but they might not have been prompted to say what they really wanted to say. Whenever I've asked, is there anything you want to add? Is there anything we didn't cover that you would like to add? Someone has always said something. Very few times when I've asked that question, someone has said, no, I'm good. I covered it all. I really mean that. You'd be amazed. And I'm still amazed by that. So ask that and then establish a plan for follow-up. You are going to have more questions as you dig into the story. It is very common for you to follow up with your subjects again, even after the interview, and it's perfectly okay. So talk about how they want that to happen. Can you email them? Can you text them? Can you call them? Hey, we've been communicating on Instagram. Can I still message you there, or is there an easier way for me to reach you? Make it easy for them. They're more likely to respond. Okay. Immediately, I went Elmer Fudd there. Immediately when you're done, make notes on your notes. All right. Try to get to the story to at least get to a little mental debrief immediately after the interview while the stuff is fresh in your head. What was the most important thing? What do you think is going to be in your lead or in your main idea of the story? Think about the news values that we've talked about and do this as fast as possible. Okay? Because I know life happens and other things go on and you start to lose the experience right away. So do this as quickly as possible once you finish the interview. So that's kind of a really quick and dirty overview of interviewing. But this is one of those things, and I think this is true of learning to play an instrument or learning to play a sport or taking on a hobby. You have to do it in order to learn it. All right. I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face, and I'm damn near blue in the face. Um, about this, but it's most important for you to practice it. So go out there, make some mistakes. You're going to, I promise, and that's okay. Um, these mistakes are not fatal, right? They are opportunities to learn. If you have concerns, if you want to run questions by me, if you have specific questions about anything I shared today, please don't hesitate to follow up. This is not easy, right? And I want to be a resource for you as you move forward. So there are other resources on our class page about interviewing. Check those out. As you prepare and you move forward in this class to do video interviews, for either, the next assignment or the final assignment, and really any interview you will do in any journalistic capacity in your career. They are the foundation of what we do as journalists because journalism is about, I hope you're all screaming at the top of your lungs, people. All right. Journalism is about people. Reach out if you have questions. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next time here in Journalism 205. Take care, everybody.